ourselves ready. Okay, so our next presentation is going to deal with mold. I know a lot of us have worked on properties that have this problem, so I think this will be very interesting for all of us. Today we have Charlie Leduc from Moldbusters to educate us a little bit more about some of the costs and some of the problems that are out there. Please welcome Charlie Leduc.
Well, I personally find this microphone restricting, so I'll stand back and just project my voice if that's okay with everyone. Can everyone in the room hear me? Perfect. All right, so my name is Charlie, and I'm with a company called Moldbusters. We're primarily based in the Ottawa area, and what I hope to do today is explain to you, or at least come to some type of explanation as to the complexity behind mold or fungal contamination issues in homes, and what the most appropriate solution for those complexities might be. Personally, I don't have a background in microbiology, so I'm not going to bore you with a lot of super fancy terms. In fact, I have a background in social work, which is where I got my master's at Queen's University for. And essentially I got into this industry a few years ago to do something along these lines, was to help present and convey a very important message. And the message is that our goal should always be to protect what's most important. Not the deal, not the money, but essentially the families that are going inside of these homes to live and reside. And oftentimes people have a lot of questions when it comes to mold. They have a lot of misunderstandings and misgivings about it. And so how I got into this company was to do just that, was to help deliver a very important message, that we need to protect what is most important to us. So Moldbusters, we consider ourselves to be leading indoor environmental experts. So we do a lot of different types of services. So we're not just a specific mold company. We look after asbestos testing, we look after VOC testing, radon testing. In addition to testing services, we also look after resolving issues that are currently found. So we are what we consider to be a full service environmental company. Inspections, testing, and removal. We have over 15 years of quantified experience doing this type of work. Not just standing behind and reading the results or interpreting the data, but also hands in actually doing the work itself. So we do specialize in a few things, one of them being indoor air quality testing. We also look for mold and asbestos in bulk samples, whether that's vermiculite in attics, pipe wrapping, or specific tiles that may be contaminated. Anything that is considered to be a contaminant source, we specialize in the analysis, the detection, and naturally the removal of those specific materials. Another thing that Moldbusters strives to do is deliver consistent educational awareness about mold and about the complexity behind it all. As I'm sure you guys are all very much aware, when it comes to mold, there's a lot of gray areas. There's a lot of gray areas that, for example, insurance companies won't touch. They won't maybe deal specifically with mold. They may deal with the causes of it, whether it's a pipe leak or a flood, but they won't deal with it itself. Similarly, Health Canada strays away from very specific thresholds or guidelines when it comes to mold exposure. So this means that there's a lot of complicated matters when it comes to mold and its properties. So what we strive to do is deliver something a little more consistent in terms of education and proper marketing of what mold is. We are a multifaceted company that strives on being insightful, innovative, and original. I see a lot of people are looking at this crazy looking device over here, and most of you guys probably know what this is. Who can tell me what this is in a nutshell?
Drone.
It's a drone, yeah, exactly, right? It's the infamous eye in the sky that could potentially be watching every move we make. Well, we actually took this device and we rendered it to serve our needs. One of the things that we started offering a little while ago is aerial roof inspections using this drone. So we've customized it naturally, and we've added high definition cameras so we could zoom in on specific parts of a roof or a building structure. We could also interchange this camera to equip it with an infrared system. so we could detect levels of pockets of moisture or humidity or even heat loss. So when it comes to trying to think outside the box in this diverse and complex industry, we try to stay ahead of the 8 ball. As you can see, you can download our free mold inspection app, which if you do have your smartphone, I highly suggest you do it. Because if you're in a property and you see something that looks like mold, pick up your phone, take a picture of it, and send it directly to us. We'll give you a free consultation within a matter of minutes. Moldbusters actually started 15 years ago in Russia, of all places. So that's where the idea was born. And our founder, moved over to Canada and started the first headquarters, which is close by in Ottawa. And quickly after, we decided to expand a little bit. Almost like a franchise, not quite, if that makes any sense. And we started opening up offices in Montreal, Quebec, Toronto, the GTA, Winnipeg, so on and so forth. Where now at this point, Moldbusters is considered to be an international company with offices in Singapore, Malaysia, and soon the Philippines. So we take all of this knowledge in terms of our involvement internationally, and we apply it to how, as Canadians, we could use this information to better equip ourselves against mold and ensuring that our homes are considered safe. We do have a secret, and well, it's not going to be much of a secret after this. I will share it with you. Our big secret, and we actually wrote the book on this, it's not mold until it's tested. That has saved our asses so many times in this industry. Oftentimes, a home inspector will go up into an attic, do his usual thing. You'll see some black spots on the trusses or on the roof. Right on this report, black mold, and all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of pandemonium. The deal is lost. The owners are completely in disagreement. The new potential homeowners are maybe scared off, and you have people in the end left wondering, what am I going to do? And oftentimes we're called in to verify this. And I'll tell you, the results, we don't have any statistics to say what the percentage is of confirmed versus non-confirmed cases, because it's so varied. That unless the substance or the discoloration or the concern is verified by an accredited source, it's next to impossible to determine that it's in fact a mold issue. And so we stand by it. We stand by the fact that if it's not tested, it's not mold, no matter how obvious it may seem. Here's an example. This is a beautiful home in Manitic. Do you guys know where that is? So we were called in because the previous owners had concerns that there was mold. They felt that there was a smell in the basement and that there was mold present. Well, I actually took this picture. I didn't see any mold whatsoever. I walked into the basement, I didn't smell anything. I didn't see anything. In fact, I thought about setting up camp in this basement. I thought it was a beautiful home and it was in pristine condition, and I saw, according to my expert eyes, nothing wrong with it. They went ahead with our recommendations to conduct an indoor air quality test. And I'll take some time a little bit later on to explain what exactly an air quality test does and why it's so good. Well, we did the air quality test, and sure enough, this is what we found. Now, the air quality test shows what was behind the wall, but it shows from a laboratory's point of view that that basement was highly contaminated with a toxigenic species of mold. Sure, the owners were not crazy. They actually did have a problem, even though we could not see with our own 2 eyes. Conversely, I'll give you guys another example. This was in an apartment complex in downtown Ottawa. Now, I know the picture is difficult to see on the projector, but this bathroom, the shower, inside, the walls, the ceiling were black. It smelled gross, it looked gross. I walked in and I walked out, grabbed my mask and walked back in. And sure enough, I did the usual checks. I looked for moisture. There was no moisture behind the walls or in the ceiling. The humidity levels were at 56, which is a little bit above normal, but nothing too crazy. And in fact, I took a swab, put it in a solution, and no mold was present. So I was a little confused. All the readings were off. Although visibly, it seemed like a pretty easy case. And had I been in the business of scaring people into soaking money out of them, I could have probably got this intended to go ahead with a mold remediation project. But we did an indoor air quality test, and sure enough, there was no mold that was found. The discoloration was a variety of other factors. It was dirt and grime and just poor painting. The painting had actually started to discolor. So what in fact seemed to be a really easy case of mold contamination and a potential lucrative remediation process was not in fact the case. In both of those two cases, we only could have determined that through comprehensive testing. So keep that in mind, that it's not mold until it's tested. Here's a fun fact, there's over 10,000 known mold species. Now that seems like a lot, and it truly is a lot. The thing is with mold is that all of it is allergenic. So any type of mold, no matter what type it may be, whether it's Stachybotrys, Chaetomium, Fusarium, those toxigenic species, or whether it's something that's common that we're probably breathing in right now, like Cladosporium or Basidiospores, regardless of that, all mold is considered to be allergenic. Within mold, there are some toxigenic species, which are the ones that are of real concern. And within those specific species, some of the mycotoxins that they produce are known to be carcinogenic. So this is where it can get really scary for a potential homeowner or potential buyer who hears that they may have a mold issue. And oftentimes, and correct me if I'm wrong guys, is that whenever someone says they have mold, they automatically say, I got black mold in my home. Right? Because that's how they associate. They see a dark discoloration and they call it black mold right away. And that's not necessarily the case. See, black mold or Stachybotrys is not always black in color. Actually, it starts off to be relatively gray and powdery to begin with. And then over time, given the right conditions, it turns into that known dark green, slimy, gross thing from space. When it comes to mold growth, it only takes a little bit of time for it to start growing. Between 24 to 48 hours of a known water intrusion. So this answers the question, well, how long has this mold been growing in my home? Well, it's next to impossible to determine how long it has been growing without extruding or removing the materials themselves. All it takes is a little bit of water to get into an organic source like drywall or a textile and the right indoor conditions, and mold will start to grow. So it doesn't need to be something that has been occurring over a prolonged period of time. We're talking about something that can happen relatively instantaneously. And the other fact is that mold can damage health, it can destroy building structures, and it will kill real estate deals in the end. And when it kills real estate deals, it destroys and ruptures the continuity of families and their lives. To get into a few basics, mold requires three things in order for it to grow. One, it requires a food source, it requires a level of temperature that's adequate for its growth conditions, and it requires moisture. So for example, has anyone here ever walked into a bathroom and found mold in the shower on the tiles? You don't need to, you just shake, yeah, that would be good for me. I'm nearsighted, so any type of sudden movements will give me the indication that you're paying attention. So when it comes to that, we know for one that mold does not grow on tiles. It doesn't grow on ceramic tiles. So that's kind of surprising. Well, what is that black stuff that's growing in the shower then? Well, it could be mildew, it could be something else. See, with mold it needs an organic source. It needs something that's porous, something that's cellulose-based, like wood, drywall, paper, textiles, carpet. It needs something that it could actually start to feed off of. Unfortunately, ceramic or concrete or even metal does not provide those sources. So if you see some type of weird discoloration on a material like that, chances are it may not necessarily be mold. It also requires a specific temperature. So as I showed in the picture with the humidity reader, the level in that particular room was at 56%, which again, the normal range is between 30 to 50 is where we would like to kind of stay. 35, 40%, you're in prime territory. So whenever the temperature is elevated, whenever the levels of humidity are elevated, those are conditions that are conducive to mold growth, and naturally water or moisture. So it doesn't take a flood, and it doesn't take direct penetration of moisture to create mold. All it can take is condensation. And that's something that we see a lot of times now in newer homes that are built airtight in order to conserve energy. And unfortunately, as a result, they don't breathe properly. So during those summer months where it's really hot outside and the AC's cranked indoors, and conversely in the wintertime, when the heat inside is cranked and outside is really cold, what you start to happen is that the building envelope is incapable of breathing properly. And that starts to create moisture, condensation. And if left unchecked or untreated, and given these right conditions, you can really start to have a mold issue on hand. Now the real problem when it comes to mold is what you don't see, and that's mold spores. So mold spores are microscopic airborne particles. We're breathing them in right now, which is something to take in after eating lunch. They're so small that we can't see them. They're very light and they disperse through the air very easily. Here's the best way I could describe it to you. I'll just take this envelope with my name on it. And so let's picture a tree in the fall, okay? And so what you have is you have the soil, and then this paper clip, which I've dismantled, I apologize, is the tree. So at the very top of the tree you have the branches and you have the leaves. Now keep in mind it's in the fall, so the leaves are brittle and it's not going to take very much for them to get strewn about the lawn. Now underneath the soil and connected to the tree is the root system, right? If you don't remove the root system, you still have a tree there. So the same thing happens with mold. So mold, what you can see on the surface is only a fraction of the issue. You still have all the root system that's underneath, and you still have all of these leaves that are on the tree. So whenever you see, for example, a surface that is contaminated with visible growth, what you have actually going through the air is even much worse. Because mold spores can survive in very, very tough conditions. Actually, microscopically, their construct is very similar to a lobster, which is why a lot of people who are, for example, allergic to shellfish will have a heightened sensitivity to mold. It's a weird little fact, and I'm sorry to throw that out there, but a mold spore is very, very hard on the outside, so it's difficult to just kind of break up and throw away. It requires something a little bit more in-depth than that. And mold spores are scary in the sense that they're self-germinating organisms. So whenever the mold spores get dispersed through the air, and we don't need very much, we could just take someone walking by, a door opening, a window opening, that will create a dispersion of spores. Those spores eventually land on something, whether that's clothing, whether that's floor or a wall. And all it takes is an intrusion of moisture, increased levels of humidity, or improper ventilation, and those spores start to reproduce. And that's how mold spreads. So it spreads by the spores dispersing, landing onto other materials, and then them germinating on their own. So it's very, very sci-fi. And the mold spores are the issue. Whenever people are, in terms of exhibiting symptoms that's attributed to mold exposure, it's usually a result of inhalation of those spores over a prolonged period of time. It's rare that we have a situation where someone is reacting to dermal contact with mold. In just 1 square foot of moldy drywall, so something that's very, very small, you can have over 1 billion mold spores. And keep that in mind that if they start to disperse, you can see how easily it would take for an entire bedroom or an entire house to get overtaken with mold in a very short period of time. And we have an example of this that I'll show in a picture later on, where a very small area was overtaken with mold, and in a short time, the entire area was overtaken with mold. Now, although we're talking about homes and that's our primary concern, it's important to know that mold is not limited to drywall or the interior of a home. So just on that subject of how mold can easily propagate, we had a client who had a beautiful car. It was I'm not a car guy, I could barely even find my own gas tank, but it was a Porsche Boxer, if that makes any sense to you guys. And he got it cleaned up, got the interior vacuumed, got it all detailed, and then parked it in storage for the wintertime. First hit of spring comes out, he goes to the storage place, opens up the storage locker, and this is what he finds. The entire car completely covered with mold from head to toe. So the seats, the leather, the stick shift, the carpet, absolutely everything was covered in mold. Well, first of all, the materials, which are organic in nature, weren't thoroughly dry, so they were wet. It was closed in, the windows rolled up and put inside an enclosed area, no ventilation. And it was a heated environment, so there was natural humidity that was formed. All three of which were conducive conditions for mold growth. Now, fortunately, we were able to remediate this car form, but the mold got so entrenched into some of the mechanical components. So you would turn on the AC or the heat, and it was just a nightmare situation. And again, we're talking 3 months where the car was locked away. So it doesn't take long for something very small or seemingly insignificant to grow into being such a huge problem. Which is why when it comes to the cost of cleaning something like this up, it's a lot more in-depth than just looking at the problem and providing a remedy. You have to get the whole history and find out exactly what it's all connected to. Unfortunately, I lied. I am going to get into some boring science stuff. So there are 4 types of mold that can be categorized, and they're pretty much categorized based on their water requirements. So there's hydrophilic, which is the most common one, especially here in Canada, that we encounter. It's the one that requires the most amount of water. And then there's mesophilic, which is second most common in Canada, requires a little bit amount. So we see this in bathrooms where, for example, a gasket leaks or something along those lines. So not a huge intrusion, but something significant enough. The other 2 are pretty much rare in Canada, the zero tolerant and xerophilic molds. Xerophilic molds are essentially found in arid environments like the desert, which you would think, well, you need water, don't you? Well, yes, but because the materials, or the wood in particular, are so dry and so brittle, when there's a little bit of rain or a little bit of moisture, automatically there's a propagation that occurs almost instantaneously. And zero-tolerant molds are ones that we would find mainly in our foods. So ones that are pretty much dry in nature, but need specific environments to grow in. Now, when it comes for some of us to be exposed to mold, there are 3 primary ways that we can get exposed and get ill. One of them is through inhalation. That is the most common. Does anyone here know the story of King Tutankhamun in Egypt, or the mummy's curse? No? Okay, well, back in the 30s, they found King Tut's tomb. And there was legends that the tomb was considered to be cursed. That if anyone were to walk into this tomb, that they would be afflicted and that they would die within 7 days. Well, sure enough, the explorers and the archaeologists who found this tomb, they did not heed to the mummy's warning, and they all died. And that further compounded the truth behind the mummy's curse. Well, fast forward to 2011, someone actually did some research on what happened, and in fact, the environment in which all of the mummy's artifacts were located were completely saturated with mold. And in fact, all of those people did not die from the mummy's curse, they died from aspergillosis of the lungs, meaning they inhaled mold spores to the point where mold started growing inside of their lungs and overtook them, causing them systemic failure and them perishing. So that is the most common way in which mold attacks us, is through inhalation. The second is through actual physical contact, which is why if you have small children around and there's, for example, mold growing on the wall, it's always important to try to first of all make sure the mold's gone, but make sure that no one's touching it. I'll show you an example of what dermal contact to a toxigenic mold can look like. And then the other most common is through exposure by ingestion, so by eating it, whether by mistake or on purpose in some cases. Some common allergenic reactions can vary from mild to moderate. Now, from mild, it could be from congestion, feeling like you're sick. In fact, a lot of people who are exposed to mold inside of a property exhibit flu-like symptoms. And oftentimes they don't bother to get it checked out because they think just that, oh, I just got the flu, I'm just sick, no big deal. And maybe that's true, but oftentimes if there's indoor environments which are negative in nature in terms of mold, this is what you will start to find. Some moderate symptoms include itchiness all over the skin, or even some patients, if you will, describe itching inside of their own bodies that they can't seem to get. So that kind of sounds scary in and of itself, and naturally difficulty breathing. So people who are asthmatic, in fact, are more likely to exhibit adverse health consequences to mold exposure than someone who's not asthmatic. And severe exposure and reactions can result in a host of things I'm not going to list off, as I'm sure you could read, that are pretty gross. And naturally the worst case is death. And there have been many reported cases of death that have been attributed to mold, and as a result of them not being treated properly. That's pretty nasty, right? And that's essentially what physical contact with a toxigenic mold species may cause to someone's skin. So as we can see, this looks and probably feels really uncomfortable. Why am I showing this to you right after lunch is probably what you're wondering. Well, when it comes to mold, it's best not to take any chances. It's best not to think we know everything. It's best not to think that we know what the climate is like. The one thing about mold is that it reacts to one person differently to another. That's why Health Canada has no recommended threshold limits for indoor mold conditions. Is that you would react differently to mold than I would, and you would react differently to mold than you would, because we all are individuals. We all have our own immune system. We all have our own propensity for reacting to certain things. With toxigenic mold or black mold, we would look at this as being called Stachybotrys. Now that's the main category of black mold. And under Stachybotrys you have maybe a couple hundred different subspecies or subgenuses of that mold category. And a lot of these are known to cause major problems for people. As I mentioned earlier, black mold it's not always black in color, so we started to see it as being black or green, slimy, shiny, gray, and powdery. So when you look at that could be almost any type of mold. So when you're seeing something that is moldy in nature, you don't really know unless you're looking at it through a microscope whether or not it's black mold or something else. That's why, again, the importance of getting it tested is so prevalent. Because with black mold or with toxigenic mold like Stachybotrys, it produces mycotoxins. And I don't know if any of you guys remember, sorry, I don't mean to sound condescending, but you guys remember the war in Vietnam, right? And there was an agent called Agent Orange. And yellow rain fell upon the people in certain towns. And it was a biowarfare, it was a chemical agent. And in fact, the primary chemical agent in that compound that was used to attack people was a mycotoxin that was derived from Stachybotrys, this particular mold spore. So if this particular toxin can be extracted and used naturally in combat, it's definitely something to be concerned about. So that's why getting it tested is important. So that when we come up to the remediation process of things, naturally, we are going to approach remediating a toxigenic environment much differently than we would come to remediate an environment that is moldy but that's non-toxigenic. They both have very different sets of procedures, and according to the guidelines that we are employed by, the IICRC or the NCS 500 S520 guidelines, there are certain criteria that needs to be met in order to properly remediate these species. The second most common species that we will find in an indoor air quality test is called Aspergillus. And this is one that is almost next to impossible to properly identify unless it's done with a non-viable spore trap. And I'll explain again a little bit later on what the difference between viable and non-viable are. And Aspergillus is common in indoor and outdoor environments. This is why it's important whenever we're conducting an indoor air quality assessment, for example, that we conduct a sample outside. Now, a lot of times our clients ask us, well, why the heck? Well, they don't usually use heck, they use more direct expletives. Well, why are you taking a sample outside? Why are you charging me to take a sample outdoors when my problem is inside? Well, this is why, is that we need to find out what mold is growing actually on the indoors and whether or not it's indigenous to the indoors. If, for example, we find Penicillium or Aspergillus outside as well as inside, we compare the two. Which one has the higher count? If indoors is higher than outdoors, we got a problem. And if outdoors, the count of Aspergillus is higher, well then it's considered to be normal. And that's the way of being able to safeguard ourselves when dealing with the client, is that we always conduct that outdoor sample in order to have that baseline to compare things to. And that is the only standard or only criteria that Health Canada lists for indoor air quality testing. The way that they determine whether a property is considered to be safe or hazardous is two things. One, are there toxigenic species of mold inside the property? If so, irregardless of its count, if it's 1 spore or 1 million spores, it's considered to be hazardous and requires remediation. Two, are the spore levels inside higher than outside? That's how they list things. So that's why the outdoor sample is very, very important. Aspergillus is very, very common. And if it's found in low numbers, it could not really cause much problems. But once it starts to be found in very high levels or high numbers in environments that are confined or improperly ventilated, they could really start to create some adverse health reactions and consequences for people. Penicillium is a group spore that's very similar to Aspergillus. In fact, when you look at them under a microscope, they're almost identical in nature. That's why oftentimes if you guys have received an indoor air quality report, you'll usually see something pen/asp. They're grouped together. They're almost identical in nature, but they're also very, very different. So without doing a proper air quality analysis, you won't know exactly what you're dealing with. And again, why am I spending all this amount of time talking about the differences of mold? Well, it's important for what we want to do next, which is clean the property. Whenever we're called in to a home, we're seldom called in to do testing. It's rare that people want to spend a couple $100s on getting some air quality tests when they can see the frickin' mold in their washroom, right? They want us in, they want us to clean it out, and they want us to get rid of it pronto. But for us, it's not that simple. Indoor air quality tests are essential in determining existing or even potential problems. Again, fast forward or rewind back to the opening images where you saw this beautiful basement, looked clean, didn't seem to have an issue, but it had a major problem. And indoor air quality tests are actually required in order to determine whether a house is considered to be safe for occupancy. You will often find this if a home was previously labeled as a grow operation. It needs a clearance certificate. It needs some type of validation that the indoor environment is safe. Not safe from marijuana, safe from the mold conditions that are oftentimes produced in these grow ops. So mold is in fact a serious issue. Indoor air quality tests provide conclusive results. Now, there are a lot of people who may say that indoor air quality tests are inconclusive, they're subjective, they vary from time to time. Yes, that is true. They vary in terms of the numerical value, but the actual particles that are captured in an air quality assessment tool are there. The numbers will vary based on the conditions. So an indoor air quality test essentially is a device that we place in a room that collects the air for a period of time. Now, we calibrate the machines to capture whatever the flow rate should be for that room. We base it on square footage, we base it on what type of information they want. Generally, a non-viable indoor air quality test for a normal room, maybe about half this size, we would set at 75 liters. So we have this machine that looks like a tiny little vacuum. It's about the size of a microwave oven or even a small toaster. And on that device, we have these cassettes. And they are round. They could actually split apart if you cut around the band and you split them in half. Inside, there's a little glass slide with an adhesive band on top of this slide. So when we put the cassette on top of the device and we set the flow rate, it starts to suck in air, and it starts to suck in all of the solid airborne particles. They land onto that glass slide and essentially get trapped there. We then seal up the glass slide in the case, and we send that to a lab. They take the cassette, they open it up, they put it under a microscope, and they tell us exactly what was found in the air. So if there were pollen, dust, rust, mouse or bat droppings, mold spores, whatever was in the air that was a solid particulate, the laboratory can tell us what they are and what their concentration levels are. And for us, in particular, indoor air quality tests are the first and last steps in the mold remediation process. So whenever we are asked to come in and do, for example, a remediation job or to clean up a problem, we always at the very end provide a post-remediation air quality assessment. This is A, to show that the work that we did was legitimate, and that B, that the environment, the indoor environment, is now considered to be safe for occupancy. But we can't get to that stage without first diagnosing the problem. Similarly, when I go to a doctor, he's not just going to give me a prescription based on what I tell him. He needs to do his test and make sure that what I have or what the symptoms are identical to what he's going to prescribe me to. And we try to treat that the same way when it comes to mold, is that we don't provide a solution unless we fully understand the problem. Not only what types or species of mold is, but how entrenched is it in the organic-based materials? What is the source of the issue? Can the source be corrected? It's pointless for us to go onto a property, rip out the drywall, spray some stuff, whatever that stuff is, and then leave and call it a day. Well, what if the original problem hasn't been corrected? Well, then you'll have a resurgence of that problem. What are some preventative measures that can be taken in order to ensure that it doesn't happen again? These are all factors that we consider when proposing a remediation plan, which again drastically affect the costs altogether. How our general process happens from top to bottom, it usually starts with a phone call or even a chat on our website. So if you go to www.busmold.com, you'll see that there's an interactive chat applet. You can just actually log in and start chatting with a real-life human being. If it's our person designated for that, they'll answer you right away. If it's outside of business hours, well, it gets synced right to my phone, and at 2 in the morning, I'll open up my phone and start chatting with you. So I dare you guys to try it out. And essentially, we're able to book same-day appointments. In this industry, it's important to be on top of everything right away. That's the one thing that we found, that if we, for example, didn't answer the phone or we didn't respond to the client's need, they went somewhere else right away. And the reason it wasn't that we weren't a good company is that for them, it's an emergency. For them, it's either a matter of life or death, and there's some sense of needing to get something resolved as soon as possible. And so with our company, we made it a policy that we want to respond as promptly as possible to the needs of our clients. And I think that is one of our secrets too, is that we understand that for everyone, no one searches for mold issues until they're encountered with it. And when they're encountered with it, then they start doing all this research. And that's when they find out what kind of crazy stuff they're up against. And we like to try to ease that sense of praise. We naturally provide comprehensive visual assessments of the property. So as I mentioned earlier, we started using these to inspect roofs and where leaks were coming in. And we also provide thermal imaging inspections. Our technicians are certified thermographers, so they're not just some guy with a Home Depot camera walking around with a camera flashlight. He's a certified guy, he knows what he's looking for, and he's able to assess issues right on hand. And naturally, we provide a variety of different sampling mediums. We're not just an indoor air quality testing company. So if we were to walk into an environment and we were to see, for example, black discoloration happening on the wall, well, we could actually test that discoloration on the spot. So we could take a swab analysis and swab the area in question, put it in a solution, and within 3 to 5 minutes know, is it or is it not fungal in nature. This is exceptionally helpful if, for example, there's a problem in the attic. Attics are very difficult to test. You can't do an indoor air quality test in an attic because it's airflow from the outside. Automatically that compromises the integrity of the test results. So you need to find another method. Well, the first thing is let's find out if the spots in the attic, for example, are moldy. This swab will tell us instantaneously. And then if, for example, you need something more in-depth and more conclusive, we could provide something like a tape lift, which essentially it looks like a piece of Scotch tape. It looks kind of funny whenever we show this to a client. They think we're ripping them off somehow. But we take this little piece of tape and we put it against the black discoloration, we peel it off, we put it back onto its proper place, and we send it to a lab and they look at it and they analyze it and tell us what it is. And naturally there are bulk samples, which are actual physical pieces that we would cut or remove. For us and for most of our clients, this is the last resort when it comes to inspecting for mold in particular. They don't want someone walking into the home and cutting out pieces of their wall to find out whether or not there's mold. They want something a little bit less invasive and a little cheaper. But with our company, we're able to provide every possible sampling medium when it comes to indoor contaminants. So all of our samples are sent to a third-party accredited laboratory. We don't have some guy in the basement doctoring up results. We actually send them off to a very reputable company who provides a completely unbiased analysis of the results. We take those results, we interpret them into an easy-to-read format so any client can read them. They're as laid back as possible. They explain clearly what the problem is and what the solution is. And we usually get the results within 3 business days, which again, when it comes to clients or deadlines, 3 business days sometimes is even a lot in itself. So we do provide rush analysis, but our norm, 3 days. And you get a full report, you get the analysis, and you have an idea of what to do next. You have a remediation plan in mind. Now, when it comes to the remediation process, and I will take some time to answer your questions, which is what I'm most excited about. This part I loathe. Answering your questions and interacting, that's what I like most. But when it comes to the remediation process, it's very, very unique to the home and the individual. We don't have a charting system that says X amount of square footage drywall infected by mold equals this amount of money. It just doesn't work like that in this industry. You have to look at all of the other indoor environmental factors. You have to look at what the house is like, where the property is located, what's the history behind it. All of these things are actually essential in not only providing a short-term solution to the current issue, but also ensuring that there's a long-term preventative plan in place to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So we understand the mold problem from the inside out. And we think that's our advantage. We think that's our competitive advantage, is that we're not just a testing company. We're in the trenches. We're actually, we know what the back of a drywall piece looks like. We know what an attic looks like. We're in there. And we find that that helps us out when we're conducting our basic visual inspections, is that we understand the complexity of how homes are built and how environments can be affected. And our goal is not just to clean up the mold problem, but it's to eradicate the source of the issue. If it was water penetration or poor ventilation, our goal is to tackle that source. And you can't determine the source of the problem until you're remediating it. That's been our experience. About 85% of the cases that we have encountered, and we are a company that specializes in residential, commercial, and government contracts. We are 85% of the time only able to determine conclusively what the source of the issue was once we've actually been removing and getting involved into the problem. So sometimes, there's a flood, that seems pretty obvious. Okay, that was, well, maybe that was something that ignited this recent flare. What if there was something more to it? What if there was a crack in the foundation? What if there was a low-lying leak over a prolonged period of time? Well, that's what we want to fix. We don't want to fix the recent sub-pump overflow. We want to fix, the long-term issue that has been actually causing this problem. And so that's our goal, is to find out what that actual source is, remove it, and ensure that there's no resurgence of growth. That there's not going to be a flare in a few months, that we provide something preventative in place, that we educate at the very least the client on what to do in order to make sure it doesn't happen again. And naturally, our goal is always to improve the indoor air quality of a home or office. As Canadians, we spend 90% of our time indoors. And when you start looking at the weather that's gradually changing, it's easy to see why. We have 6 months of winter, and then the other 6 months are the other 3 seasons. So we spend most of our time indoors, whether that's in an office or whether that's in a home. It's imperative that the air we're breathing is considered safe. And we believe that we want to do that for everyone. Naturally, we want to give everyone the peace of mind, not only that they deserve, but that we feel that they need in order to live in their indoor environments safely. As I mentioned earlier, we are a company who believes on being insightful, innovative, and original. We're one of the first companies to have actually developed a mold inspection app. So again, it's free, it doesn't cost anyone anything, and in fact you get a direct free quote whenever you submit something to us. So essentially, whenever you include a picture or a description, it gets sent to our server. We all get notifications. A qualified technician, not just some customer service rep, will respond to your inquiry and give you the next best step of action. We also wrote a book. I wasn't lying on that when I said we wrote the book on this. We actually wrote a book called It's Not Mold Until It's Tested. You can buy it or download it through eBay, Amazon, and all the rest of that stuff. And it's a very in-depth manual. I would highly recommend, it's not a sales pitch, I would highly recommend for you guys to have it. It's really insightful, really helpful. It goes through everything I pretty much shared with you guys today, but again, we'll explain some of the methodology behind remediation processes. It will go behind some of the equipment that's used, what are some of the procedures in place, and why certain things are done the way they are done. So if you haven't already, I would highly recommend you guys go to moldbook.com and download that as well. In addition to apps and books, we also have a course that we actually devised, created, and delivered for real estate agents who needed to continue up on their credits in order to continue their certification. So we offer a course that covers everything from Health Canada guidelines and regulations, indoor air quality assessment, different sampling procedures, and this is a free course. This is something that anyone could take. So again, I would highly recommend that you guys go to this site and bookmark it. Let's just say you're in the middle of something and you need some answers. Well, go to the bookmark, you'll probably find it inside the course. And again, the course will also provide you direct contact links to us to help you out in the middle of whatever you're involved in. So again, I encourage you guys to visit us online. We're everywhere that you could possibly imagine, so you can find us anywhere, and we're quick to respond and we're eager to help. With that in mind, I'm here to answer any and all questions that you may have, and I hope this was informative for you. Thank you.